I'm Father Sebastian. I'm a priest of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, also known as Rokor. And today we're meeting in Cornville, Arizona, which is outside of beautiful Sedona, Arizona.
Father, have you always been Orthodox? How did you become an Orthodox priest?
No, I've been Orthodox for about 15 years now. I was born and raised modern Catholic and eventually became traditional Catholic, running through all the different levels of traditionalism. Started as an indult conservative, went through SSPX, and eventually ended up as a sedevacantist before becoming Orthodox. So,
talk to me a little bit about that journey. So you said you started as a modern Catholic. What were the things that you were noticing at the time that what year was this when you were a Catholic?
So I was born and raised in Southern California, and grew up as most people in that culture in the 80s in high school. And, it was, I went to high school 5 minutes from the beach. I had a heavy metal band, from about the age of 11 until I went in the Marine Corps at 18. And just did the stuff that most people my age in that place would have done. I would say there was a couple of unique things, though, and that is that I'd always believed in God, even before my parents had explained that to me. Somehow that was just a gift of faith that I had. And I always had a sense that there was in addition to that there was a God, that there was some type of obligation that would be, that would go along with that. But unfortunately, I didn't really have a clear sense of what that was. And the truth is I lived pretty much like everyone else in terms of the sins that I fell into, and there really wasn't much of a difference there. I think the only maybe difference was that I had some cognizance of the fact that I was sinning. And I felt bad about, I felt bad for it. Like, I think I had a conscience, and I just didn't have clarity about, once again, I didn't have support a lot of times for what was truly sinful or not in my background. When I got out of high school and went in, like I said, in the Marine Corps, I actually went in as a reservist initially. And then our unit got activated during Desert Shield and Storm. So I went overseas for that for almost a year. But during that time, I wasn't sure about a lot of things. I started searching like a lot of others. I actually went and left the modern Catholic Church initially and went and became Protestant for a short time. I didn't really find much there. I mean, honestly, even though the modern Catholic Church that I'd grown up in was in Southern California and was pretty, light, liberal in that sense, and we had Happy Birthday Jesus masses and things like this. Nevertheless, I just there was still a sense of the sacred that had been preserved, and so at a certain point, I decided, I guess when I was about 20. I decided that I wanted to dig deeper into my faith. And so I went on a journey, looked into all the Eastern religions, eventually came back to Catholicism and, the more conservative version of it. And I went to Thomas Aquinas College, actually, which isn't far from where I grew up in Santa Paula. I was born and raised near Ojai, so not far away from each other. And I actually went to church with one of the tutors there. They call them tutors there, not teachers. And so anyway, he was able to help facilitate me getting in there, and it was a great experience. Scholastically, I wasn't really up to the task. I was just a surfer boy, heavy metaler. Like, I had no business really being there, to be honest with you. But I was smart enough, I think, to be able to do the discussions, but I wasn't academic enough to get through all the readings. I mean, you had to read like 100 pages a day. And the truth is, I'm very ADHD. I didn't really understand what that meant at the time. Honestly, didn't really know how significant that was until a couple of years ago. I just came to realize that factored a lot into a lot of my struggles and even failures over life. But anyway, I did the best I could, and but it was a great experience because it opened me up to scholastic philosophy, and pretty much just did self-study from there, my own guided studies. And that was good because it gave me an opportunity to really get a sense of that side of the world. So from there, I spent a number of years in that. I mean, I was traditional Catholic for more than 15 years, probably 16, 17 years, and went a full journey, like I say, from all the way through the different levels. And I was very involved in these levels too, I should say. I was in the district headquarters of the SSPX. This is before they reunited. I was there with them until about 94, 95 timeframe. And I did their boys camps. I did a lot of things for them. I was a property manager. I worked in their seminary in Winona, so I was very, very well connected in that space. And in about 2000 is when I, like 99, 2000 timeframe is when I came to adopt the sedevacantist position, and that was based primarily on trying to get a better sense of what a lot of the references. Let me just put it this way: a lot of the things that the SSPX was putting out at the time, they sound good on the surface, but when you dig into the actual references that they're saying, you find that actually what's being said oftentimes is different than the limited piece that they would put forth. So as I dug deeper in trying to increase my faith, it actually undermined my faith in that, and it led me to become a sedevacantist. When you read, for example, like the writings of Cardinal Bellarmine, he makes it pretty clear that the condition that a lot of people would argue is occurring in the modern Catholic Church is just impossible. You can't have the Vicar of Christ simultaneously be the Antichrist. And when you have teachings that are in complete opposition to one another, at least that's how traditionalists see it, that's the kind of situation it gets set up for. So I was sedevacantist for quite a while. And to be honest, I didn't have any problems doctrinally. I pretty much figured I'd arrived where I was needed to be. But what was different and what was interesting is the fact that I came to realize that I was dying spiritually. And that's where the real problem was. The problem wasn't in so far as some kind of revelation I had in terms of some doctrinal thing that had been the case in every other instance. Every other instance, I had moved to the next level, if you will, because I had come upon some knowledge or some information that led me to realize that where I was at wasn't right. But in this case, it was a completely different thing. I had realized that I'd become a whited sepulcher, as our Lord says. I'd become a rotted shell. That I was living a decent life externally, but internally I was just completely dead. And, I hadn't always been that way. And initially, of course, actually for a long time, I just blamed myself, just took the hit on that, said, well, I must be doing something wrong. And, my spiritual fathers, or spiritual directors, they would call them there in that context, you're telling me the same things to do. And it's not working. But problem must be mine. But over time, after several years of that, I realized, well, wait a minute, it isn't just me. I started looking around, I started talking to people that had come into that same, style of traditionalism around the same time, and noticed that actually this was kind of a universal problem. We'd all become incredibly judgmental, and very much, for example, when you get done Sunday with a liturgy, or with a mass, and the conversations at the end were entirely about how we're better than everyone else. Oh, these people are heretics, and these people is bad. And every conversation is about, oh, the Feniites this, and this person that, and it's all negative. And there's almost no discussion about spiritual growth or the things that we as Christians should be focused on. And so it led me to a crisis of faith. And I've had a lot of life experience that maybe we can talk about here in a moment, but I'd been around the world. I'd seen and done a lot of crazy things, and it gave me a perspective that was pretty well grounded. I understood that I don't want to be a part of the world. Like, if this isn't the true faith, what do I do? And I didn't want to just go and become worldly because I hated the world. Like, I saw that life led to death. I didn't want that. And so I knew about Orthodoxy. I'd actually known about Orthodoxy for quite a long time, and I had briefly considered it. But unfortunately, I had such a Catholic mindset at the time that I couldn't really accept it for what it was. And I was judging it according to Catholic categories, right? And that just was never going to work. So finally, in an act of desperation, I made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And as a traditional Catholic, here I am as a traditional Catholic in the Holy Land during Holy Week and Pascha. I can't get services. There's literally no traditional churches over there. I cannot go to anyone. I can't get confession. I can't get communion. There's literally nothing for me over there. And that was kind of shocking, honestly, that in the birthplace of Christ, I'm going to all these holy sites, and there's no place that I can even receive the sacrament. So that was kind of shocking. The other thing that was shocking to me was just how much more devout the Orthodox Christians were in these sites than anyone else. You could see without knowing anything about them, you could immediately identify who were the Orthodox Christians in these holy sites. They were the only ones that knew how to conduct themselves with decorum. They had true reverence. They had true respect. I remember being literally at the birthplace of Christ in the Church of the Nativity, and there were a number of pilgrims or whatever they were behind me, and they just started laughing and smoking and joking. And you have to understand, I had spent all this time in the military. I had been a security contractor for, about 6 years at this time. And I turned around, I was ready to fight these guys. I said, I yelled at them. I said, think about where you are. So may or may not have been the right thing, but, that's where I was at that point. I just, we should have respect for the holy things. I mean, regardless of anything else. So I was going around. I had a really hard time getting the Church of the Sepulchre. This was a turning point for me. And I was trying to figure out what does it all mean? I'm going to the sites and I'm having these great, experiences, but they're not answering anything, right? I'm seeing the love and devotion, the genuine love and devotion of Orthodox Christians. Because remember, I was there during Orthodox Holy Week, so there's many of them there on pilgrimage. And like I said, immediately identifiable. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. This is typically a Catholic thing, right? Traditional Catholics are known for their reverence. That's what drew me to them in the first place. Why I ceased to be a part of the modern church was largely because of the reverence and the respect and the seriousness, right, with which they took the faith. And, but here I am, not getting answers, not understanding what's going on. I've tried to get into the sepulcher itself like 4 or 5 times now. I went there different times. Every time I'd go and stand in line, it's only open for a couple of hours, and they close it. I can never get up there. So, so on the last day, it's literally Pascha. Okay, so it's kind of after the main festivities. The Holy Fire typically actually happens on Holy Saturday, so I'm there on the following Sunday, the next day. And I'm like, okay, I'm getting ready to leave. My last day, there for 10 days. It's my last day. I'm going to give it one more chance, right? One more shot. So if anybody's ever been there, it's a big courtyard you typically go through, oftentimes filled with people itself. And then you go in, and usually the church itself is filled with a number of people. And then the actual sepulcher is off to your left, and it's in its own little chapel there. And it's a decent distance. I don't know, maybe 100 yards or something. I mean, it's a decent distance, normally filled with people. You have to kind of weave your way to get there. Well, I walk in that day and I don't see anyone. I'm like, that's odd. Where's everyone? It's Sunday. Why isn't there a lot of people here? And I'm like, okay, interesting. So I walk and I see the door to the sepulcher is open. And I thought to myself, I'm probably not supposed to do this, but I'm going to. So I literally walked straight into the sepulcher. I just went straight in. Nobody stopped me. I didn't see anyone. There was no obstacles whatsoever. I literally walked straight in. And I was in there, I don't know, 10 seconds or something, and they closed the door. I'm in there with just a couple other people, including the patriarch, the Latin patriarch. And we're just in there for 10 minutes. I mean, normally when you go in there, it's they let you in there for 30 seconds and they roll you out. I was in there for 10 minutes, and I can just tell you that during that time, I would not have had the language to speak of that at the time, because as a Catholic, there is no language for that. But now I know, as an Orthodox Christian, my heart softened. That incrustation, as we would call it, of the heart, just basically melted away. And I realized that there's more to the faith than what I had been taught. And so after that, I mean, I was just profoundly affected. I mean, there was just an immediate change that took place in me. And I knew at that point that I needed to reevaluate Orthodoxy on its own terms, right? Allow it to gauge its veracity according to its own first principles. And that's what I did. Over the course of the next year and a half or so, I went through and now had to work through the doctrinal issues. And there was a number of, challenges to that, you could say. But what finally helped me get over those challenges was that book, Two Paths by Michael Welton. It was very, very good, and because he was a former traditional Catholic too, and he had struggled with a lot of the same things, and it helped me to kind of get over that hump. And so I was baptized in 2009, summer 2009 in July, and about 10 years later is when I went to seminary. So they say in Orthodoxy, typically you should be Orthodox for at least a decade before you get ordained. And I spent a decade before even going to seminary, because people don't understand how profound the differences are, really. It's difficult to grasp from the other side. Now, obviously, you probably have an easier sense because you've done all these interviews. But even today, there's still things that occasionally arise that I'm like, oh, Yeah, I'm still holding on to this past notion of how something is that I need to modify, like retool my thinking on certain things. It's been, from that perspective, it's every step is built on the last, and every step has been necessary. There's no way that I could have gotten to the point that I am now had I not gone through all those other previous steps. So, for those who look back and say, oh, I wasted all these years, I don't see it that way at all. That experience was obviously invaluable to me. It gave me a perspective and a discipline that I maybe wouldn't have had otherwise. And ultimately it's God's will, right? These things play out according to providence. And so, sure, in one sense, of course, it'd be nice to have been able to do this, to be Orthodox much sooner, but, God works things out in his own good time. And so, I'm very thankful for that.
You mentioned being cognizant of your own sins growing up in your spiritual journey, and then how the Catholic approach didn't really answer that for you. There was still some spiritual turmoil inside. Mm-hmm. When you finally became Orthodox, how did that approach change as it related to looking at your own sins?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is Catholicism is focused on actions primarily, right? I'm not saying there's not more to it than that, but the more that's there is sort of subtle. It's not very well defined. Obviously, you do have what would almost be considered like a sentimental type of spirituality that you see occurring like whatever the 17th century, 18th century and on with the Sacred Heart and those kinds of things. But generally speaking, it's a very non-emotional faith, right? The heart is not involved. Now, heart, I don't mean to attribute the heart to the emotions. I do want to make that clear and make that distinction. But the Catholic way, in my experience of it, was all about actions, externals. You do this, you get this result, right? And that's just not life. That's a part of it for sure. Actions do matter. I'm not taking up the Protestant approach that actions, of course they matter. But for us, for the Orthodox Christian, your external actions are really just like the prerequisite. That's the first step. What's far more important than that is a conversion or the transfiguration of the heart, right? So for us, it's not just about what you do, right? But it's about why you do it and the spirit in which you do it, right? So Orthodoxy involves, for those who really embrace it to the fullest, it involves a complete transformation of the self. It involves a turning, if you will, of all of everything we are, every element of our being, all of our faculties. And it doesn't allow room for any place to keep God out of, right? So like I said, as a Catholic, this was common, not just for me, but everyone around me, is we could, as long as we did the right things, okay, I'm avoiding, fornication, I'm doing this, I'm doing these things, I'm good, right? I'm going to church, I'm avoiding the major sins, I'm good. Orthodoxy would never look at it that way. It's so much more than that. Like I say, following the commandments, that's like 101. That's prerequisite. Like that's the starting point. Okay, of course you're following the commandments. Now what? Right? It's a starting point for us. And it's why I think I can honestly say, I've been involved with a lot of religions, either having participated in them. Like I said, I spent 7 years in Afghanistan. I worked over there 7 years. I was probably in country more than 4 of those. So I had a lot of exposure to Islam. The same thing for them. Of course, Islam is very much about just the external works. Without a conversion of the heart, you're not living the Christian life. Like you're not living the full Christian life, because God wants every part of our being. So let me say this a different way. Our will is, of course, a baseline for everything, right? What we decide to do it factors in, and I think Catholics for sure would agree with this, that our will has to be united to the divine will, right? Our actions have to be in union or in coherence or in alignment with the divine will. So we're in agreement on that. But to take it further for us, we also have to ultimately have the right desires. Like our desires should also be, right, holy. And it takes a while to get there, of course. I'm not saying that everybody has that, of course, but that is the goal. The goal is to have all of our faculties in alignment. And that's why I could say I think it's the hardest thing that someone can do. To live Orthodoxy to the fullest, it is the hardest thing that someone can do. And of course, it's absolutely worth it. It's the only life that makes sense to live. But it's also tremendously challenging when you understand it in those terms, because like I say, there's no quarter given. I can't, I'm going to do these nice things over here, and then over here I'm going to just hack my brothers to bits. Like that's not allowable. Like you have to genuinely love your enemy. People that do terrible things to you, you have to be okay with that. And that's really hard. It's really hard. It's really, there's a lot of people, unfortunately, in social media, I think, that are coming into Orthodoxy that don't grasp the significance of what they're getting ready to participate in. And like in my own catechism, for example, I'm pretty rough, like not intentional, not trying to make people go away, of course, but I want them to understand what they're getting into. Like this is the hardest thing you're ever going to do in your life if you take it to the level of seriousness that you should. And out of every person I baptize, there's probably 3 or 4 that go away, because what I don't want to have is I don't want them, because I've seen it a bunch in churches where people come in and they go out. They come in the front door and they walk right out the back door. I don't want that on my conscience. I want that on my soul. People need to understand that this is a hard thing. Of course, it's worth it once again. Of course, really no other life makes sense. But you have to have a proper sense of what life is about. And so a lot of what my training, the really the formation rather than education is what I'm more concerned about. It's more focused on correcting presuppositions, right? A lot of the presuppositions that people come into the faith with are just wrong. And they're unfortunately not required. We as clergy are not doing our jobs in forcing them to leave their baggage at the door. They bring it in with them. And then, in addition to them not necessarily living the faith to the fullest, they influence those around them in a negative way. And now Orthodoxy in general suffers, right, as far as the expression of it. And we see this, sadly. We see this, especially in American Orthodoxy. There's a lot of that. And so one of the reasons that I'm a ROCOR priest, why I chose ROCOR, is because, we are a jurisdiction that takes things the most serious. During COVID, we didn't close our churches. I have the support of my bishop. That's the big thing. I mean, for someone who's a layperson, it's not as big of a deal because obviously they can do what they can do within the church. But as a priest, I have to trust my bishop. I have to respect my bishop. And I absolutely trust and respect my bishop, Archbishop Kirill, San Francisco and Western America, who I'm under. And I'm very thankful to be under him and to know that he has my back. When I stand for the faith and I stand up, sometimes we find ourselves in conflicts because people want to have a comfortable Christianity. I can't sell that. I can't live with that on my conscience if I water things down, right? So it's great to know that my bishop has my back and that, I can live the full expression of my priesthood and have the support that I need to be able to do that without being second-guessed or having certain things shut down, as I know for a fact happens in other jurisdictions. I know people that it's happened to specifically. So I don't have any of that. So ROCOR is wonderful in that regard. I mean, obviously ROCOR every jurisdiction has their own challenge. Our challenge can be sometimes that it's very ethnic. Not every church is. The church here, St. Gregory Palamas, it's a convert parish. It's constitute converts, and it's very much open to Americans. But it can be, as you have in the Greeks and everywhere else. Sometimes the churches can have a degree of I don't want to call it always ethnophilatism. Of course, that's the sinful part. I'm not saying it rises to that level, but there's certainly elements of that. I mean, I've had a friend that I worked with overseas when he went to go convert in a Greek church. They said, "You're not Greek. Why are you here?" They said, "Why are you here? You're not Greek, right?" I mean, that's literally what they told him. So we don't want that. That is something that we need to work on, I think, and eliminate. I understand the importance of culture. I definitely don't say there's anything wrong with Greeks wanting to be Greek and Russians want to be Russian. I mean, they have a very proud, long history that has helped them, especially, I could speak more to the Russian experience. It's obviously the culture that helped them survive communism, right? The communist oppression. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for the culture, but also too, I don't share it. It's not a culture that I have, and so it can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes in the parishes where you have a strong American contingent, a strong Russian contingent, and we do the best we can to keep it going. And honestly, when it works well, it can actually work really well because each side has something to offer, right? The convert side has the benefit of a fresh perspective, right? They just grow up with these things. They don't just take it for granted. Like they understand how important they are. But the the cradle side has the advantage. They have that stability, right? They're rooted in things, and they just have a depth that we as converts don't typically have. It's just an understanding that it's very hard for us as converts to acquire. especially you come in later in life like I did.
You mentioned that when you have new converts coming in, sometimes they bring in, different types of baggage. Is it like a spiritual baggage, or what types of negative things are they bringing into the...
Across the board. I think it starts with attitudes, though. One of the problems, one of the modern phenomena that impacts everybody, regardless of whether you're coming into the faith or trying to go into some profession, is this idea that the world is supposed to conform to our idea of the world, right, of things. And that's just completely false. It's a completely wrong notion. The church isn't to conform to our ideas about church. The church is, and we're to conform ourselves to the church. And that's what's so beautiful in Orthodoxy is, and that's one of the reasons it doesn't change, right? We don't impart, at least not in terms of the core doctrines. Obviously there is a degree of application we can talk about on the pastoral side of things, that we apply based on circumstances of the time. But the core truths never change. Our core practices never change. They developed for a little while there. Obviously, when the church came out of the catacombs, there was a few centuries there of development when the church could be in the open. But pretty much past that point, it really, whatever development, quote unquote, has happened has been very, very minor and inconsequential. So the big thing is they come in and they a lot of them have an axe to grind, right? They're here for the wrong reasons. So one of the first things I have to do is figure out, why are you here? That's one of the big first questions. Why are you here? And a lot of times if I get because, Orthodoxy's based or something like that, it's like, okay, we got a lot of work to do. Okay. Right. That's not the right reason to be here. Yes, it is based. All right. But that's not why you should be here. Right. And so people that they're coming to Orthodoxy because it's countercultural, total wrong reason to do it. Okay. I'm not saying we're going to, exit you out. I mean, I'd want to educate you, like show you, okay, cool. I'm glad you're here. But like, let's work with that and figure out, help you figure out the right reason to be here. And some make that jump and others don't, and the ones that don't, I don't, maybe they go to the churches. I don't know what happens to them, but you shouldn't, coming to church is almost like a marriage, right? I mean, you have to know the person you're going to spend your life with, right? You need to know the institution, right? And the people, because it is a family. Church should be family. And so you need to know what you're getting into. You need to know that when it gets hard, once those initial graces wear off and it becomes a hard slog, are you prepared for that? Because it's going to be that way. You have all these, they come in and it's so easy for them. Everything's so easy for them when you're a convert. And I remember it too. It was easy for me, but where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, is when it gets tough. In the Catholic world, they talk about the dark night of the soul. We wouldn't necessarily call it that, but there's a certain equivalent of that. Where those graces, at least the feeling of those graces, right? The experience of those graces seems to be withdrawn. And now it's the hard work of the will. I don't feel like praying. I don't feel like but I have to do it anyway, right? And this is where most people fail, I think. And so I think that's the biggest problem is they're not conditioned. They have the wrong ideas, first of all. They're here for the wrong reasons, and they're not conditioned to understand what really is involved in living as an Orthodox Christian. It's not about you. It's not about what you want. It's not about the aesthetic. All those, once again, are great. The aesthetic of Orthodox, the beauty it's unmatched. But that is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. That aesthetic is to help us to appreciate and to do worship to God. But if you don't attend services, you want to hang out on your phone, and scrolling Instagram or something instead. Obviously that's disordered, right? That's not going to get you where you want to go. Now you're just LARPing, right? So I'm all about reality-based pastoring, reality-based parenting. I want people to understand what they're getting into. It's not always comfortable, but it saves a lot of hardship down the way, right? Let's just get the difficult part out of the way. Let's deal with what we're dealing with, and let's move on in a manner that's solid and is rooted, right? It's rooted in real things, rather than delusional, right? I don't want to sell. I'm not trying to sell something, right? And I don't want to accuse anybody else. I don't know how others do it, but I get the sense sometimes, or at least it would seem as though maybe sometimes Orthodoxy gets sold as, maybe not like the whole picture, right? It's great. We have this great aesthetic, and we have this, and it's all true. We have all those things, but you got to work for them. It's not. You're not, unless you die right after you convert, you're going to have to put in the time and effort. And so I would say, I think one of the big things about my ministry that maybe is different is that I personally have probably struggled more in that than just about any person I know. Part of it is because of my, I've come to realize now, I didn't know that's what it was till about 2-3 years ago, is like how hard it is to do certain things when you're ADHD, like severely ADHD like I am. And it's very difficult to study, for example. It's very, very tough to do certain things. I mean, I have a lot of strengths that come from it too, but like to read a book from cover to cover is very difficult, It's very difficult for me to be consistent. It's very difficult for me to exercise discipline. And this is a point I think I really would like to emphasize today is, how important that discipline, that underlying discipline is to living the faith, because that's where people stand or fall. I'm not going to say that it's all about willpower. I'm not saying we're Stoics. There's a lot of issues with Stoicism too. Orthodoxy, the royal path is always in between extremes, right? Of, God will do everything for us and we have to do everything for ourselves, right? It's in between those. It's neither of those. But there's an element, there's a synergia, right? There's a synergy between the will of God and our will. We're not like the Protestants. We kick our feet up and say, okay, God, do this for me, And we're also not like other faiths where it's all up to us. If it were all up to us, then why would we need God, right? Like if we had enough willpower, right, to make ourselves saints, many people would be saints. Humility is the underlier to everything in the spiritual life, I believe. And it's being able to humble ourselves as men, especially, that's tough, to try to acquire strength by being weak, right? That's kind of how it comes across. And it's very, very challenging, but it's what's necessary. And I would say that in addition to that, nevertheless, we have to do our part. And so I've spent many years, really about 3 decades, working on kind of a method to help myself with that. And that's kind of like part of my ministry is sharing that, is that's what I'm planning to share, is things that I've worked out, an understanding and certain techniques that I've been able to work out that kind of help with providing that prerequisite to living as an Orthodox Christian. Because here's the hard reality of it is that if you don't have a base level of self-control, self-discipline, self-regulation, which, let's face it, sadly, a lot of people, they don't have. They weren't raised with it, right? Myself included. It's very, very tough to live the faith. It just is. An advantage that the church fathers and those are our ancestors is they were raised in a much harder world than ours, right? These people were naturally tough because they had to be, right, to survive. I mean, life was just not easy like it is now, and they couldn't spend their whole days just literally being entertained, 24/7. And so they were just cut from different cloth than we are. And I do think there has to be a pastoral recognition of this. We have to be understanding the people that are coming to us and meet them where they are and not make unreasonable demands of them on the one hand. But also to not let them wallow in that either, but work with them to try to, hey, this is where we need to be, this is where you are, and this is where we need to get to. Let's work on that process, right? Kind of like weightlifting. I like to think of this analogy. When you're, if I want to bench press 500 pounds, I'm not going to just throw it up there, right? So, all right, willpower, right? I'm just going to bench press this 500 pounds. I'm going to get crushed, right? If I can only lift, 185 or something like that, and I try to lift 500 pounds, I'm going to get crushed. So I have to work up. Okay, I get consistent. Okay, I do 185. Right, let's add another 10 pounds or 20 pounds on there, and I work up to that. The spiritual life is no different. And I think that's another problem with people coming in is they have this idea that they want it, therefore it is, right? I imagine it, therefore it is, right? It's a huge lie that we've been sold from all the affirmation or whatever, the self-help nonsense, that you just will it and it is. Well, no, if that were the case, everybody'd be doing it. Like, it's hard. Right? And most people don't have the requisite willpower. And truthfully, even if they were very strong people, even if we lived in the time of the pagans, the fact is what the pagans couldn't do is they couldn't be Christ-like on their own. Right? That requires Christ. You cannot become Christ-like without Christ. And that's, I've worked with guys, just kind of my own experience of this. I've worked with guys, like I said, I haven't been a security contractor, working intelligence field over in Afghanistan for, like I say, about 7 years. I worked with some of the toughest, most capable human beings on the planet as far as like skills and proficiency in their jobs. And yet, these are people that literally like books are written about, right? Heroes. And yet, these are the same people, sadly, that can't keep a marriage, right? Their personal lives are a disaster. A lot of them, unfortunately, commit suicide. So they're very strong externally, right? But they don't have the ability, right, to that internal conversion. That's what I'm talking about. Orthodoxy gives you all the tools, right, and the understanding of that internal conversion, which is what really matters. Because look, let's face it, an actor, right? We see this. An actor can act like a saint, right? We have plenty that have. Sheila Booth, right? He's going to play Padre Pio, right? He can do that. An actor can act like a saint, but is he really a saint? Anyone. I'm not saying him specifically. Maybe he is. I don't know. But the point is that becoming a saint, becoming Christ-like, becoming the type of person that God intended us to be before the fall, right, involves a total transformation, not just of my actions, not just of my external appearance, but once again, of my dispositions, right? Everything, like genuinely loving your enemy. Like it's one thing to not strike back when he strikes you, but it's a whole nother level, right? To actually still love him despite him striking. You see the difference there? And that requires so much more effort, it's so much more crucifixion of our will, so much death to self, right? It's all about the death of the self and repentance, continual repentance, and continual prayer, of course, that's a part of this repentance. And to get to that point, and only somebody who's living that way can ever hope to see that in their own life. And so, so disposition, I guess just to kind of hit on this topic, disposition, I think, is one of the most important things that we as Orthodox Christians understand the importance of. I'm not saying, I don't feel like praying, I shouldn't pray. I'm not saying that, okay? Sometimes you just have to grunt through it. But what I am saying is that we should do what we can, for example, to create the right conditions for prayer, right? Rather than rushing into it with a bunch of things on our mind, like actually carve out the right time in our day, right? Spend some time in silence beforehand, maybe do some preliminary prayers before you pray, right? Spend time in silence before Christ, like listen as well as talk. Like there's so many things that we can do to make our prayers more efficacious, right? If you think about prayer being a conversation with God, I mean, of course, it's many things, but that's one of the things it is. If you consider a conversation with somebody else, a conversation with you, for example, right? I'm just doing nothing but talking. Obviously, I'm doing that here, right? But because the interview. But if we're having an actual conversation, right? It's going to be off-putting, right? Like there's got to be an interaction there, and I think it's true in prayer that we need to listen as well as talk. And obviously, the words of the church are beautiful, and we should pray the church prayers, but we should also listen, And I think once again, come into it with the right spirit, leaving our earthly cares at the door, right? And just experiencing the faith is, and the love of Christ is the most important part.
Let's talk about your ministry specifically here. How did you get in Arizona, and how have you seen the growth of Orthodoxy over the years?
Yeah, so I was living up in Idaho, and there was a lot of things that happened. I was actually a sheriff's deputy up there. So just real quick on my background, physical, I've been in the military. As the Marine, like I mentioned, I was activated for Desert Shield and Storm. And then I got out of that and I worked overseas for 7 years. And then after that, when I got home and I got married, I didn't want to deploy anymore. And so I actually got hired as a sheriff's deputy up there. And for a short time, it didn't last very long. I was actually involved in a shooting. And thank God nobody died. So, but it just altered the whole dynamic of things. And from that point on, I wasn't really sure what to do, honestly, because that had been my whole working life. I mean, how else I'm going to make a living? I did have a background in manufacturing. I had some other companies doing body armor and making knives and different things. But it was just challenging without, when you're undercapitalized, underfunded, it's really hard to make some of that stuff work. And especially when you're competing with big companies, right? And so I just wasn't sure what to do. And I was working a job, actually doing a security job out in Northern California and out in the woods there. It was a pretty neat job, but it just became clear to me that this is there's more to, I need to be doing more. And at this point I'd been, like I say, Orthodox for about 10 years. And my priest up in Idaho, who was very responsible for a lot of my formation, probably the majority of my formation, Father Gregory Horton, who I'll call out. I'm very much indebted to him, from Holy Myrrh Bearers up in Bonners Ferry, Idaho. It's an Antiochian church there. Wonderful parish, wonderful people, wonderful priest. He had been long encouraging me to be a priest, and my whole life I had wanted to be a priest. But I have to be honest with you, when I came into Orthodoxy, I just couldn't even think about it. I mean, I was just flatlining. I mean, I was in such bad shape. It took a long time for me to be able to even have any concept. Like, it just was out of my mind. And by the time I could start to think about it, it was no longer an option because I was married. I married, I had children by this point. Like, how would I afford seminary? And as it happened, we were selling our house. We had built a house, and we had sold it and had some money from that. And it dawned on me, wait a minute, actually, I could go to seminary. So I came back from that trip, and I just was trying to figure out what's going on. And my Father Gregory said, well, it's time to go to seminary. And I'm like, what? It's like, didn't even thought about it. I'm like, well, actually, I could do it. I have the money, but this is like August now. It's like beginning of August. Like, what seminary am I going to get in, a month beforehand? So originally he's, try St. Tikhon's. And so I called them up, and they didn't have any, it was too late in the year. And then I called Jordanville. At this time, remember, I had no affiliation with ROCOR. I didn't really know much about that, the differences there. But yeah, Jordanville, I'd actually taken, I was already in their system because I had taken some of their online classes there, their online theology program that they have. And so, yeah, they took me in. So, I mean, basically within a couple of weeks, I sold my house, packed up everything, drove to New York, and did Jordanville. So, that's a whole nother story in its own right. But, it was a very, it's a profound experience too, to be there for the time that I was able to be there. And so anyway, the reason how we ended up in Arizona, though, specifically, was that there just wasn't much in the way of prospects, job prospects, like making a living for my family up in Idaho. So we had considered moving to Arizona even before going to seminary. So when I could no longer afford to stay there in seminary, I had to come back, do something. We came to Arizona. I had lived here 20 years ago, I guess more like 25 years ago now. Spent a bunch of time out in the woods. Kind of was living kind of as a semi-hermit. It was one of my experiences. Of course, as a Catholic, I had no guidance. It was it was an awful experience, to be honest with you, because there's a reason. They say you need a blessing to do these kind of things. I didn't have a blessing. I was just trying to clear my senses, and just try to live a holy life. But I had no concept of what I was doing, and it was pretty disastrous. But God spared me. God saved me, and worked some good out of that. And so basically, yeah. So yeah, I've always lived Arizona. Always thought it was a neat place. Always wanted to get back here. It's right where we live. Is one of those beautiful places on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. Sedona and some other areas, Payson, and and in Utah. This whole area is just absolutely amazing. And I'm very thankful and blessed to be able to live here. And so I've always wanted to come back. So in seminary, I made some contacts there who said, if you're going to go to Arizona, go visit Holy Archangels in Phoenix. That's the place you want to be. And these were people that I really trusted. They're very well known in ROCOR. And that's what it said. So that's what I did. So I started attending services there at Holy Archangels, and eventually, and I completed my my studies with Father John Peck's course, his Saint Femia Academy. And so I did classes there, and then Father John recommended, he was the pastor there, the rector there at the time. He recommended me for the diaconate, and then eventually for priesthood. So I was a priest down there. I've been a priest. I was ordained July 3rd, 2022. So just very recently moved up here. I've been servicing this parish for about a year, once a month. So once a month we had another priest, Father James, that would go down and do the Slavonic services, because I don't know the Slavonic. That's the part of Jordanville that I missed, the language stuff. So he would go there, and then once a month I would come up here. And a couple months ago, I actually moved my whole family up here. I have another priest down there servicing Holy Archangels now, and this is my permanent parish. So,
how did you select the name St. Gregory Palamas, or like the Saint?
Yeah, well, people know that Sedona is known for the whole energy thing, right? It's this big claim to fame, and it's a big New Age capital. There's a lot of cultism here, and it's one of the reasons I actually wanted to come here. I wanted to plant the flag of Orthodoxy right in the heart of the enemy, so to speak. So I've always been drawn to it for that reason. I do believe that there's more to that story. Like, I'll give you an example. When I was trying to figure out where else I might go, when I was looking for another parish to start, I looked at some other towns, Gilbert, I looked at Payson. What's interesting is, I would walk around in Cassock, I would gauge the reactions of people. And Gilbert, they don't know what to make of it. People would just literally act like you don't exist. They were so uncomfortable. They don't know what to make of this. They just won't even talk to you. And then in Payson, kind of a similar thing. I got laughed at one place. I'm like, okay, all right, shake the dust off my feet, right? But when I came to Sedona, I had the most interest. Like, people were very respectful. There was a lot of like interest in that. And so, look, I mean, obviously, a lot of these beliefs that the people up here hold to are completely wrong and even demonic in some cases. Not everyone holds them. I think this is my theory. Not everybody is. There's a lot of ignorance, right? Not everybody is ill-willed, I guess I would argue. And I think that what you have up here that you don't have, for example, in more, say, blue-collar areas, is this hard bias against anything traditional, right? Anything mystical. One of the hard sells for Orthodoxy with Protestants, in my experience, is there's a lot of hard sells. One is the mystical element, right? Protestantism, at least modern Protestantism in America, is just so iconoclastic, right? And so they don't know what to make of this. They're so biased from their education, from their formation, that it's really hard to get through. And the other part, of course, there's more to that. They think salvation's a given. So wait a minute, I have to work for this thing that I thought was just a given all this time. I mean, it's a hard sell. So I think from the standpoint of conversions, my working theory, we'll see if it plays out, is that there actually is more openness to Orthodoxy in a place like this, where people at least are willing to accept, right, the existence of another world, right? I think this area has a lot of potential. So now, why St. Gregory? Of course, St. Gregory is the one who formalized the theology of divine energy, right? And so we can speak to the New Age person in a manner that will, in a language that makes sense to them, but we can fill the holes that are existing in their knowledge, right? We can actually answer the questions that they're seeking. And so it's a very, very appropriate saint for this area. And of course, just so you know, I mean, the Archbishop has to approve it. So, we requested it, and, we requested different names, and he approved this one. So providential in that regard, I think. But we don't just pick a name. Like, there's a process there. The Archbishop has to accept it and that sort of thing. I think, in fact, actually, the first name that we selected, he actually rejected before that one. So it was very, very providential, I believe. And it's great, just a great saint for our time. There's just so much confusion, and I think there's a need to answer questions that maybe didn't exist before. I think that's something too that we have to sort of accept in the modern condition. People are weaker, right? So pastorally, we have to address them slightly different, meet them where they are. And I think the second thing is that there are questions that are being asked now that we have to be able to answer that maybe we wouldn't have had to concern ourselves with before, right? So St. Gregory is a great one for that.
Why do you think he's been such an influential staple in the Orthodox Church? What are some of the things that he promulgated that, people are applying now into their personal lives?
Well, I mean, he's largely a part of the neohessastic movement. Obviously you have, there's a number of authors now coming out of Greece. When I say now, I mean as in the last, the 20th century. Some of them are more well regarded than others. But without commenting on all of them, I would say the neo-hesychastic movement in general has been mostly good. I think there's some elements of it that have not been. I think people can come away sometimes with the wrong impression, as though all we need to do is say the Jesus prayer and we can dispense with everything else. That's, of course, completely wrong. But in general, yeah, the whole idea of incorporating ceaseless prayer in their lives, that's an important part. The ability, the recognition that it's important to pray always, and to engage in watchfulness and these practices. And personally, on a more personal level, I mean, this is because it ties back to my story. It's that personal experience of Christ, right? That's the Western faiths don't have any theology for this. Basically, they are stuck with God is not noble in his essence, and we agree with that. We acknowledge, that God is transcendent in his essence. But we add to that, he is knowable, right? He is immanent in his energies, right? It's so critical. It's such a missing link. And that's why there's no concept of the heart in Western theology, not as we understand it. There's no concept of noose. And that's everything. The noose is everything for us, because that's the noose that communicates with Christ directly. That's the eye of the soul, right? Whereby we can see God. It's the place where we have that direct experience. It's that part of the soul that would allow, for example, a Saint Mary of Egypt, right, to know all the scriptures and all theology without ever having read it. Like, the Catholic approach doesn't have any model for that. I mean, I'm not saying that they don't have an explanation, but their theology doesn't allow for that to be. it's just a miracle or something. But like, if God is not, if there's no way to directly interact with God, that means that God can only be known through intermediaries. Now, we acknowledge that God is also knowable through intermediaries. I can look at a sunset and, it's beautiful that, God created that. I mean, we have that too. But we're not limited to that. And that's what was missing in my Catholic formation, was that experience of the presence of God, in the noetic intellect, right? So just a real quick to make this distinction. One of the challenges that happens, and I see, I won't name them here, but there's a few Catholics that I've seen that are utilizing Orthodox theology. It's not organic to their own faith, and to me, it's a little bit disingenuous that they do this. There are Catholics that will read, for example, the Philokalia, and they'll draw stuff from it. But what they don't understand is that a lot of the language used in that is different. It means something different than what they think it means. And so they're going to draw potentially wrong conclusions. This is one of the problems when you're going to read the Fathers. Of course, I recommend that. Everyone, who's serious about the faith recommends that on some level. But what you also have to understand is that the Fathers use language in a specific way. So I would say if you're going to read the Fathers, make sure you understand the language, the philosophical language they're using. So one of these points where one of the terms they equivocate on is intellect, right? So you'll read in there, the intellect, they'll refer to the intellect. Well, what they mean by intellect is very different than what the West means by intellect usually. Okay, it can mean the same thing, but can also mean the noetic intellect as opposed to, what most people think of as intellect, the rational intellect, right? The discursive intellect, that part of us that reasons from A to B to C, right? So these are two different faculties for us, right? And in our anthropology, right, the heart is above the mind in this sense, okay? So, we talk about the spiritual heart. I'm not talking about the emotions. I'm talking about the noose, right? That part of us that directly corresponds with God. Our nature is, body and soul, and then of the soul, the lower faculties, of course, the passions, right? The emotions or the feelings, and then the rational intellect, and then above that, the noetic intellect. That's the difference. So the noetic intellect is the highest part of man for us. So for Catholics, the highest part for them is the rational intellect, which it makes sense, explains a lot why there's such an emphasis on academics for them, why the Jesuits, for example, would go through like 14 years of advanced school, back in the day, like just crazy level of education, because to them, knowing God is knowing him intellectually. For us, knowing God is knowing him noetically. Huge, huge distinction. And it just changes everything. It changes the whole game. And unfortunately, people read Orthodox books and they reread it with a Western mind and they draw false conclusions. It's a huge problem that I want to address more on my channel as I have opportunities to. It's a real problem, and because it creates a false sense of understanding. It's there. People come away thinking they know something that they don't. And so anyway, to bring it back, that's what was missing. What I would say, I'm not anti-Catholic, right? Like I didn't have a bad experience there. I didn't leave because somebody did something mean to me or whatever, right? I was there a long time. My parents, they still attend those services. I left because I realized something was missing, right? If I had to state it maybe more directly, it seems to me that the West cut the heart out of Christianity. That's what happened. Everything else was what it was. I mean, disputes about the papacy, this, that, okay. Yeah, those are legitimate disputes. But what's more fundamental in terms of the living of the faith is that loss of the noose, that loss of the heart. And I think that's like what I think we need to have more discussions about in the online space is a lot more of that. I'm not saying I will never engage in some of these dogmatic disputes or whatever, but it's not my real concern. It's not my real concern because there's enough of that out there. And frankly, if I can be so blunt, I think for most people, it's best case scenario, a distraction from more important things that they should be focusing on. And worst case scenario, it leads to actual heresy or loss of faith. The majority of online content out there, I think it's starting to change, but for a long time, it was almost all dogmatic, almost all doctrinal. And that's unfortunate. I mean, look, you have the creed. You want to know what to believe? You got the creed. It's not more. There's certainly a place in the church. There are people that need to work those things out. But so-and-so layman, even me as a priest, I'm hesitant to do it, right? I'm under my bishop, and my bishop anything I say needs to be evaluated to make sure that it's accurate, right? Even as a priest, even with theological training, I am hesitant to go into there because it's so easy to get it wrong. And you have these people with no training whatsoever, no accountability whatsoever, and they are reaching many, many people, and they're going to be held on the day of judgment. They're going to have to answer for that. I hope and pray that, if there are errors there, they correct them and they're able to do that. But it's just a very, very dangerous thing. And like I say, best case scenario, even if they're right and not falling into heresy, it's just a distraction. That's not what people need to be concerned about or focusing their efforts on. They need to be focusing on living this faith. Because when you meet the awesome judgment seat of Christ, he's not going to ask you, it's not going to be a theology test, okay? It's going to be focused on how you lived. That's where the emphasis really needs to be. That's the emphasis I'm going to try to bring to my channel, is really this living of the faith, because it's so much more important than all these random theological disputes. They're just not important, For me at this point, I can honestly say the transformations happened to me when I was a Catholic. I was very much like, I'm speaking from experience. I was one of those guys before it was cool. All right. I would engage in debates. Like there's arguments I was making those arguments 20 years ago, but what does it matter? See, right now I've reached a point that if I encountered an argument that I couldn't resolve, like back then it would have been devastating. Now I don't care. If somebody says something to me and I can't resolve it, it's just water off a duck's back to me, because by God's grace, I've experienced his presence. Right? That's all I need to know. Faith is not an intellectual assent, okay? It's a spiritual gift, right? And when we talk about noetic knowledge, right, it's a noetic knowledge rather than intellectual knowledge. Because in intellectual knowledge, you can go and do all the apologetics and go through that whole process and, oh, hey, yeah, I have faith because X, Y, and Z, right? But for us, it's not about that. I'm not saying that doesn't have its place. There's some value there for people that are still in the process, right? But once you arrive, it is just kind of a waste of time. Because even if somebody, if some atheist presented me with an argument that I couldn't dispute, I wouldn't care. Because once again, I have faith. I've been given that gift of faith, and the best way I can describe it, the difference is, it's knowledge that you just have. It's almost like intuition, right? That knowledge of faith is basically like intuition. You just know. You don't know how you know. You didn't follow any process to get there. You just know. That's faith. That's true faith. It's not something I did a process to get there as far as, like I say, an intellectual exercise. It's so much more. The faith is so much more than the intellectual part of it, the academic part of it. And I hope to see a lot more of that shift within online Orthodox. Of course, ideally, there wouldn't even be an online Orthodoxy, right? Ideally, people would put their phones down and read books, right? They'd come to church. That's what I would love to see ultimately. But I'm a realist too. I understand the nature of the world that we live in, and how difficult it is, all the demands on our attention and how limited our attention spans are, and all the way all these technologies are destroying us mentally and to a certain degree. I get that's a factor there, and that's of course why I hear this is the battlefield, right? It's not the field of battle I'd want to be on, but it's the arena that we have to engage. So that's why I'm here. But I would love to see that shift from doctrinal stuff to moral issues to but more specifically like how to live a good life. Let's focus that. We have a limited amount of time and energy, a limited amount of resources, basically. We should apply them to the most important things for our salvation. And most of what I see out there, have seen traditionally, is not that. So I'd love to see that change.
Maybe we can end on this question. What are some practical ways that people can purify the noose? And also, what are some things that we do that distract from it and bury it and darken it, I guess?
Well, there's a general way to answer that question in a specific way. So generally, I like to start with the general and then specify. Generally speaking, we have to empty ourselves of ourself, right? That means that we have to give up the things that we want for the sake of the things we know God wants, right? That's the essence of all of it is, and that's what really humility is. Humility is seeing yourself as you are, seeing yourself as God sees you, right? And so, we have to be realistic about that. We have to identify where are we falling short, and we have to give those things up. So it starts in humility, a willingness to accept our flaws, accept in the sense of like acknowledge them, right? And be willing to work by God's grace, to give him power over us, to whatever degree we're able, and it's his will to do, and to follow his will rather than our own. I mean, that's the simple essence of it. I mean, that's where it starts. Like, okay, I want to do this thing. I want to, spend 4 hours a day on social media. Is that the best thing for you? Might not be, right? I would argue it's probably not. I'm not saying that somebody necessarily, especially if it's part of your job, would. I mean, there are exceptions that can be made for sure. But instead of doing that, maybe read a book, get a good spiritual book, And I also even recommend, I would say too, in Orthodoxy, we don't do anything without a blessing of our spiritual father. That's another thing that's kind of unique, at least in my experience. Don't just grab any book. Like, talk to your priest about it. Talk to your priest about what you should be reading, because like one thing that is really important to me in my ministry at this church, and I spend hours every week dealing with hearing confessions and offering counseling to my parishioners here. I really want to know them, right? It's very important before you offer advice. Like, we'll maybe can talk about some basic things, but one of the caveats is that to give specific advice, you need to know that person specifically. I can tell you that it happens a lot. This is another huge difference between Catholicism and Orthodoxy. Is as a Catholic, I could confess the same sin to multiple priests over a long period of time, and I pretty much always got the same answer, right? Because their approach to spiritual direction is very methodological, right? There's textbooks like the DSM. They're like psychologists. Okay, this is the condition, this is the response, right? But in Orthodoxy, it's so different. Each answer, because we take a much more pastoral approach to it. I can tell you point blank that since I've become a priest, I am surprised at things that come out of my mouth sometimes in the confession or in counseling, when I'm just talking with somebody about their problems. I can have multiple people come and confess the same sin, and I will tell them completely different things. Because first of all, there's the guidance of the Holy Spirit there that's giving me the words to give to that person, number one. But number two, there is... there's a knowledge of that person, right? Like I'm sure you've heard this, but in Orthodoxy, the church it's not a court, right? It's a hospital, right? And the priest is the doctor, and the person's coming to get healing, right? I mean, really, Christ is the doctor, but we're the intermediary there, and how can I give good prescriptions if I don't know the person, right? Now, granted, people, once again, that are very holy, right? The elders, they have that insight. They would just know what to tell people. But at the parish level, it's really important that we get to know our people very well. And that's, I guess, one of the things that's really unique about our parish here is it's small, which is nice. But even as bigger, I take the time to really get to know the people. And so the advice is from that perspective, and it's very unique. So why I'm mentioning all this is because when it comes to spiritual reading, right, this is part of that. Like, how can you know what to read if you don't have the greater sense of where your condition is, and how can I know what to prescribe you reading wise if I don't know you, right? So it's really important to cultivate a relationship with the spiritual father and to get guidance from him as to what you should be reading. But everybody needs to do spiritual reading. Of course, you need to attend the sacraments, you need to pray, say your daily prayers and pray throughout the day, remembrance of God. All of these are specific things. Really, in essence, just live the Orthodox life. Like, everything's there. There's no, magic formula, cereal box solution. Like, all the answers are in the faith. All this method, for example, that I've talked about, developing and wanting to start sharing and offering courses on and stuff, I would never say that that's a necessity for salvation. I would say that there's sort of a circular process where grace heals nature, but grace also builds on nature. And what I mean by that is, so how that's relevant here is, if nature is very damaged, as it is for very many people, then grace, under normal circumstances, is going to have a harder time permeating that person's soul. If they're just living in darkness and they have all these bad habits, for example, just tons of sin, right? That's going to be hard for grace. I'm not saying impossible. It's going to be difficult. And I would say this comes back to the self-discipline part again. If one doesn't have the discipline, if one doesn't have the stick-to-itiveness, right, to stick it out and come week after week after week and go to confession and go to the services, if somebody does that, they will eventually be healed. They don't need anything beyond what the church has. What I'm hoping to offer people is something that, once again, I've worked out over about 3.5 decades now of tools that have helped me to accelerate that process. It's a crutch. It's something that helps nature not be as damaged so that grace can be more effective, more quickly, can permeate somebody's soul with less impediment. That's all. So if somebody has the patience, they don't need what I have, to stick it out and to put in the daily work. I just offer a crutch because I know people are so weak, and these things have helped me, and I just want to help them too, and but it's definitely not necessary, right? If somebody applies themselves to the faith and they have the perseverance, they have the faith, right? The trust that if they continue on this road, eventually grace will heal their nature despite how damaged it might be, they'll get there. So it really isn't more complicated than that. Remembrance of God, constant remembrance of God, repentance, incorporate, when I say remembrance of God, incorporate God into every aspect of your life. Like, think of him in all things, right? Prayer isn't just asking for stuff. In fact, asking should be the last part of prayer, right? Before we ever ask for anything, if you look at the way the Orthodox prayers are structured, and this is really kind of how, if we structure our own prayers for our own personal prayer, we should structure it this way, is you always want to first give glory to God, right? You want to acknowledge the greatness of God and his power, and and with that, directly acknowledge all the blessings that we receive from that. I mean, we wouldn't have our existence, we wouldn't have our talents, our abilities, we'd have nothing if it wasn't for God bringing us into existence and sustaining us there and giving us all the opportunities and everything we have, the talents and everything. So there's that part of it. But then specific things, something works out. Once again, this interview, I think is going to be a great blessing. I'm glad to be here. Thank you. So thank God for that, right? I thank God for that opportunity. We have to then acknowledge where we fall short of these opportunities, where of course we sin, but also to just maybe don't do as well with something as we should. God gives us all these great blessings, and yet, we don't live in a manner that is worthy of them oftentimes, right? So asking repentance for that. And then finally, we can ask for things, right? And these things that we ask for should, of course, be primarily spiritual-based things, right? And I think that's why a lot of people don't have their prayers answered. I mean, in the way that they expect to have them answered. They're praying for the wrong things, or they're praying with the wrong dispositions. And so, these are all things that we have to work with. And then Orthodoxy has all the tools to do that and to guide us. So once again, it's not complicated. It's not some special, magic formula. It's just literally live the Orthodox life to the fullest, and these things will come.
Father, where can people find you, and how can they support this parish?
Yes, we have a website that we've just started, stgregorypalamas.com. And on there, there'll be a donation link. Of course, we're trying to get an iconostas. We've only been here, like I said, for about a year, and really been a permanent parish for a couple of months now. So we're still getting underway. And that'd be the easiest way. If people are planning to visit, they should call first and get directions. That's a little bit difficult to find. And so, we'd like to tell them about the church and all that, and answer any questions they might have ahead of time as well. So,
awesome. Thank you, Father.
Yeah, thank you. May the Lord bless.